A baby squirrel clung to a fallen tree, then a wolf gently picked him up. In a world where predators hunt and prey flee, these two unlikely creatures defy nature itself. Forming a bond so profound, it will challenge everything you believe about kindness in the wild. This isn't just a feel-good moment. It's a journey through desperation, danger, and the transformative instant when a fierce predator chooses gentleness over instinct. What happens when vulnerability meets unexpected compassion? Stick around to witness the moment that changes everything. Deep in the heart of the forest, where ancient trees stretched toward the sky and sunlight filtered through emerald canopies, there lived a tiny baby squirrel named Nibbles. His world was perfect in every way. A cozy nest woven meticulously from soft moss, downy feathers, and delicate twigs. Nestled securely high in the branches of a towering oak that had stood for over 100 years. Every morning, Nibbles would wake to the gentle chirping of birds singing their dawn chorus and the warmth of his mother's tender embrace as she nuzzled him awake. He spent his days playing tag with his siblings among the leafy branches, chasing brilliant butterflies through the dappled sunlight and gathering acorns for the coming winter, storing them in hidden caches throughout the tree. Life was simple, safe, and filled with innocent joy and wonder. The forest was his kingdom, and he was its carefree prince. He had no idea that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change forever. Then came the day the sky turned black. It started subtly at first. A few dark clouds drifted across the horizon, casting shadows on the forest floor. But within minutes, the sky transformed into something sinister and terrifying. Dark clouds rolled in like a massive tidal wave, swallowing the sun whole and plunging the entire forest into an eerie twilight. The temperature dropped dramatically, and the air grew thick and heavy with moisture. The wind arrived next, not as a gentle breeze or even a strong gust, but as a violent, howling beast that tore through the forest with devastating fury and raw power. Trees began to sway dangerously, their massive branches cracking like brittle bones under the assault. Rain poured down in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. It was blinding and relentless, hammering against every surface with merciless intensity. Nibbles clung desperately to the trunk of his beloved home, his tiny claws digging deep into the bark as the world shook violently around him. His little heart pounded so hard and fast he thought it might burst from his chest at any moment. The storm was merciless and utterly indifferent to his terror and suffering, and it showed absolutely no signs of stopping. Lightning split the sky in jagged bolts, illuminating the chaos for brief, terrifying moments. Thunder boomed so loudly that it seemed to shake the very earth beneath the tree. Then came the sound, bone-rattling crack that echoed through the entire forest like the snap of a giant's spine. The tree was falling. In what felt like slow motion, the massive oak, the ancient giant that had been Nibbles' entire world, began its inevitable descent toward the earth below. Nibbles tumbled through the air, spinning helplessly and uncontrollably as his entire world collapsed around him in a nightmare of chaos and destruction. The wind whipped past his tiny body as he plummeted downward. The ground rushed up to meet him with terrifying speed, and with a devastating thud that knocked the wind from his lungs, he crashed hard into the mud below. His body ached with pain from the impact. When he finally managed to gasp for air, his lungs burning, he found himself alone in the darkness, soaking wet, trembling uncontrollably, and utterly terrified. His nest was gone. His family was gone. The safety and comfort he had known his entire life was shattered in a single, catastrophic moment. Nibbles lay there in the mud, small and broken and gasping for breath, staring up at the storm-ravaged sky. Rain continued to fall on his wet fur, and cold seeped into his bones. He was utterly, completely, and devastatingly alone. The forest that had been his playground now felt like a hostile, dangerous wilderness. Every sound terrified him. Every shadow could hide a predator. His tiny body shook with fear and shock as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. But Nibbles had no idea what or who was about to find him in the darkness. He had no idea that his greatest fear was about to become his greatest salvation. Hours passed. Or was it minutes? Nibbles couldn't tell anymore. Time had lost all meaning in the suffocating darkness and endless rain. His tiny body lay curled up in the mud, shivering violently as the cold seeped deeper and deeper into his bones with each passing moment. The storm continued its relentless assault on the forest, though it seemed to be weakening slightly. The wind no longer howled with quite the same ferocity and raw power, and the rain fell in a steady drizzle rather than the devastating sheets that had battered him earlier. But Nibbles barely noticed the change. He was too exhausted, too frightened, too broken to care whether the storm raged on with full force or faded away into nothing. All he knew was pain, cold, and an overwhelming sense of despair. His fur was matted and soaked through completely, clinging to his tiny body like a heavy, wet blanket. His small paws were caked with mud and debris. Bits of leaves, twigs, and dirt ground into his claws. Somewhere in the chaos of the fall and the storm's fury, he had scraped his left side against a jagged rock, and it throbbed with a dull, persistent pain that made every breath hurt. His stomach growled loudly, a hollow, aching sound. He hadn't eaten since before the storm began, and his little body was desperately depleted. But he was too scared and too hurt to even think about searching for food. The thought of moving, of exposing himself further to the dangers lurking in the dark forest, was simply too much to bear. All he could do was lie there, curled into a tight ball, and wait, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was waiting for anymore. Perhaps for the pain to go away. Perhaps for someone to find him and rescue him. Perhaps for the end to come quickly and mercifully. The forest seemed indifferent to his suffering, and the night pressed down on him like a heavy weight. The forest around him was completely unrecognizable. The beautiful, familiar world he had known his entire life had been transformed into a nightmare landscape of devastation and ruin. Fallen branches lay scattered everywhere like the bones of dead giants, some as thick as Nibbles himself was long. Leaves and debris covered the ground in a thick carpet, obscuring the familiar forest floor he had played on just hours before. Puddles of water had formed in every depression, creating a maze of obstacles. The familiar landmarks he had known and loved his entire life were either destroyed beyond recognition or obscured by the thick darkness and falling rain. Even the great oak tree that had been his home, his entire world, was now just a massive, broken trunk lying on its side like a fallen giant. Its roots were exposed to the sky, grasping upward like desperate fingers reaching for help that would never come. The branches that had once provided shelter and safety were now splintered and broken, scattered across the muddy ground. Nibbles felt a wave of despair wash over him as he stared at the ruins of his world, at everything he had lost in a single, catastrophic moment. His home was gone. His family was gone. His entire life had been erased in the span of a few terrible minutes. Then he heard it. A sound that made his blood run cold and his entire body go rigid with primal terror. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the damaged forest like the voice of death itself. Nibbles' entire body went completely rigid, every muscle tensing. His eyes, which had been half closed in exhaustion and despair, snapped wide open. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything but lie there exposed and vulnerable in the mud. But his body wouldn't obey his panicked mind. He was too weak from the fall and the cold, too injured and aching, too paralyzed by overwhelming fear to move even an inch. The growl came again, closer this time, more distinct and menacing. And with it came the unmistakable sound of heavy paws padding through the mud and fallen leaves, moving with purpose and deliberate intent. Something large was moving through the forest. Something powerful. Something that hunted in the night. Something that killed. Nibble's heart began to race again, pounding so hard and so fast it felt like it would explode from his tiny chest at any moment. This was it. This was truly the end. After surviving the devastating storm, after clinging desperately to life through hours of bone-chilling cold and sharp pain and overwhelming fear, he was about to become prey. The irony was almost unbearably cruel. He had escaped one disaster only to stumble directly into another, far more immediate threat. He had gone from the frying pan directly into the fire. The footsteps grew louder with each passing second. Closer. Closer still. The creature was definitely heading in his direction, drawn by some sense that Nibbles didn't understand. Nibbles could hear the sound of its breathing now. Deep, rhythmic, powerful, and terrifying. The breathing of an apex predator. The breathing of a hunter. The breathing of death itself. A low warning sound rumbled from the creature's throat, not quite a growl, but something deeper and more primal. It was the sound of a predator that had caught the scent of prey, that had locked onto its target, that knew the hunt was almost over. Nibbles squeezed his eyes shut tightly, trembling uncontrollably, every fiber of his being shaking with terror. He thought of his mother, of her warm fur and her gentle nuzzles when he was scared. He thought of his siblings, of playing tag and wrestling with them among the branches. He thought of the warm nest high in the oak tree, woven with such care and love. He thought of sunny days and butterfly chases and acorns gathered in autumn light, of the simple joys of his short life. He thought of everything he was about to lose, everything that was about to be taken from him by this creature of the night. Then a massive shadow fell across him, blotting out even the faint starlight that had been filtering through the clouds. Nibbles opened his eyes slowly and looked up into the darkness, his tiny body trembling. For a moment, he could see nothing but a silhouette. A large four-legged shape looming above him like a mountain of fur and muscle. The creature was enormous, at least 100 times his size. Perhaps more. In the faint light that filtered through the breaking clouds, he could make out the outline of pointed ears that stood alert and attentive, a long snout that twitched with scent, and a powerful body covered in thick, dark fur that rippled with muscle. It was a wolf, the most dangerous predator in the entire forest, the creature that every small animal feared above all others, the one that haunted their nightmares and made them huddle close to their mothers for protection. The hunter that turned peaceful nights into nightmares and turned survival into a desperate game of hide-and-seek with death itself. The creature that was fast, strong, intelligent, and utterly merciless. Nibbles held his breath, his tiny lungs burning. This was it. This was truly the end. He had survived the storm, had endured the fall and the cold and the pain, only to become a wolf's midnight snack. He had accomplished nothing. He had survived for nothing. It was all for nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut. Again, every muscle tensed, waiting for the teeth, waiting for the pain, waiting for everything to go black forever. But the bite never came. Instead, Nibbles felt something completely unexpected. Something warm, something gentle, something that made no sense at all. The wolf lowered its massive head slowly and sniffed at him carefully, its hot breath washing over his tiny, trembling body in waves. Nibbles remained completely still, barely breathing, his mind unable to process what was happening. This didn't make sense. Predators didn't sniff their prey. They attacked. They killed. They devoured. The wolf sniffed again, moving its nose slowly and deliberately over his mud-covered fur, investigating him with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than hunger. It sniffed his head, his body, his legs, taking its time, being thorough. Nibbles could feel the wolf's warm breath, could smell the scent of the forest on its fur, could sense the raw power contained in that massive body hovering above him. Then, to Nibbles' absolute shock and disbelief, the wolf did something that no predator should ever do. It reached down with its massive jaws and with incredible gentleness that seemed impossible for such a powerful creature, carefully picked up the tiny squirrel. Nibbles felt himself lifted into the air, cradled between those powerful teeth that could crush him in an instant, that could end his life with barely any effort at all. But they didn't. The wolf held him with surprising care and tenderness, as if carrying something infinitely precious and fragile, something worth protecting rather than destroying. For a moment, Nibbles hung there in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. The wolf's teeth were sharp and dangerous, but they held him with a gentleness that was almost maternal. The wolf's breath was warm against his wet fur. And most incredibly of all, the wolf was carrying him away from danger, not toward it. The wolf turned slowly and began to walk deeper into the forest, carrying Nibbles away from the ruins of his home and into the unknown darkness beyond. Its powerful legs moved with purpose and determination, stepping carefully over fallen branches and debris. The rain had nearly stopped now, and the storm was breaking up. But the night remained dark and mysterious. Nibbles found himself being carried through the forest, cradled in the jaws of the most dangerous predator in the land. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know why the wolf had spared him. He didn't know if this was a mercy or just a different kind of doom. But as the wolf carried him deeper into the darkness, one thing became clear. His life had just changed forever, in ways he could never have imagined. The wolf moved through the forest with practiced ease and remarkable grace, its powerful legs carrying it swiftly over the treacherous terrain despite the thick darkness that surrounded them. Nibbles, still cradled gently in those massive jaws, found himself being jostled slightly with each measured step. But the wolf's grip remained steady and careful, never tightening with pressure, never threatening in any way. The night air was cool and damp against Nibbles' wet fur, and he shivered despite the warmth radiating from the wolf's powerful body. His small mind was a whirlwind of confusion and conflicting emotions, fear, wonder, disbelief, and a strange sense of security that he couldn't quite understand. He was being carried by a predator, a creature that should have killed him instantly without hesitation. Yet the wolf treated him with a gentleness and care that seemed almost impossible, almost maternal in nature. As they traveled deeper and deeper into the forest, Nibbles began to notice that the devastation from the terrible storm gradually lessened with each passing moment. The fallen trees became less frequent, their shattered remains becoming sparser and more scattered. The debris that had covered the ground like a blanket of destruction thinned out considerably, revealing patches of the familiar forest floor beneath. The forest began to look more like the world he knew and loved, more like home. though it was still unfamiliar in many ways, still strange, still filled with shadows and unknowns and mysteries that Nibbles couldn't begin to fathom. The wolf navigated the darkness with the confidence and ease of a creature that had walked these paths 1,000 times before. Never hesitating, never stumbling, never second-guessing its direction. It moved with the assured grace of a hunter who knew every twist and turn of its territory, intimately. The massive creature's breathing remained steady and even, barely labored despite the distance traveled and the weight it carried. Nibbles found himself impressed by the wolf's endurance and strength, even as fear continued to coil in his tiny chest. The wind had died down completely now, its violent fury spent, and the rain had stopped entirely, the last drops falling away into memory. Stars were beginning to peek through the breaking clouds above, casting faint, silvery light across the forest floor in scattered patches. Nibbles could see the wolf's silhouette more clearly now in the starlight. A massive creature with thick, dark gray fur that seemed almost black in the moonlight, with a coat that looked impossibly soft and luxurious. Its muscles rippled beneath that thick fur with each movement, a testament to its power and incredible strength, a visible reminder of why this creature was the apex predator of the forest. The wolf's shoulders were broad and powerful, its legs long and muscular, its paws large enough to crush a small animal without any effort whatsoever. Yet despite that raw, overwhelming power, the wolf moved with a surprising gentleness and care when it came to carrying its tiny passenger, as if it understood the fragility of the creature it held. They walked for what felt like hours, though Nibbles' sense of time was still badly distorted by shock and exhaustion and trauma. His eyelids grew heavier and heavier with each passing minute, drooping despite his desperate attempts to stay alert. Despite his fear, despite the overwhelming strangeness of his situation, despite every instinct telling him to remain vigilant, he found himself drifting in and out of consciousness, his tired mind unable to maintain full awareness. The rhythmic motion of the wolf's steady gait, the warmth of its powerful body, the gentle grip of its jaws, all of it was oddly soothing, almost hypnotic in its consistency and care. Part of him wanted desperately to stay awake, to remain vigilant and aware, to be ready for whatever came next, whatever danger might be lurking ahead. But his body was too tired, too hurt, too completely depleted of energy and strength to resist the irresistible pull of sleep that tugged at his consciousness. His thoughts became fragmented and dreamlike. He found himself remembering moments from his life before the storm, playing with his siblings in the morning sun, the taste of fresh acorns, his mother's warm embrace. These memories mixed with the present moment, creating a strange, surreal experience, where past and present seemed to blur together into one continuous flow of sensation. Then, suddenly, the wolf came to a complete stop. Nibbles' eyes snapped open instantly, his entire body tensing with sudden alertness, adrenaline flooding through his veins despite his exhaustion. They had arrived somewhere. Through the darkness, he could make out the shape of a large rock formation, a massive outcropping of stone that rose from the forest floor like the ancient, weathered back of some long-sleeping beast from the world's earliest days. The stone was dark and rough, scarred by countless years of wind and rain and the passage of time. Vines and moss covered portions of its surface, and small plants grew in cracks and crevices, testament to the age and permanence of this natural structure. The wolf approached the rocks carefully, moving with deliberate slowness, and ducked its massive head, moving toward what appeared to be an opening in the stone, a dark mouth that seemed to lead into the very heart of the earth itself. The entrance was large enough for the wolf to walk through without lowering its head further. but Nibbles could see that it was still relatively small compared to the enormous size of the wolf itself. The opening was roughly circular, perhaps 5 or 6 feet in diameter, and it descended gradually downward into shadow and mystery. The wolf stepped inside with confidence, and the darkness deepened dramatically, becoming almost absolute. Nibbles could no longer see anything at all. They were now completely enveloped in shadow, moving through a passage that seemed to descend gradually deeper and deeper into the earth, taking them away from the world of stars and moonlight above. The air grew cooler and slightly damper, carrying the scent of stone and earth and something else, something warm and alive that Nibbles couldn't quite identify. Then, as Nibbles's eyes slowly began to adjust to the absolute darkness surrounding them, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a faint glow ahead, a warm, orange light that seemed to come from deeper within the cave, like a beacon calling to them through the darkness. The wolf continued walking toward it with steady, purposeful steps, and as they drew closer, the light grew brighter and more distinct, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls around them. Nibbles realized what the light was. Fire. There was a fire burning somewhere deeper in the cave, casting flickering shadows on the ancient stone walls, sending warmth and light throughout the space in waves. The wolf emerged from the passage into a larger chamber, and Nibbles found himself staring in absolute wonder at the sight before him. It was a den, a large, natural cavern that had been transformed and shaped into a living space. The fire burned in a carefully constructed ring of stones, its flames dancing and crackling with energy, sending warmth and golden light throughout the entire chamber. Above the fire, smoke drifted upward in lazy spirals toward an opening in the cave ceiling that Nibbles assumed led to the surface outside, allowing the smoke to escape and fresh air to enter. The walls of the cavern were smooth and worn, shaped by water and time into gentle curves. The floor was covered with soft moss and dried grass, creating a comfortable surface. Scattered around were various items: bones that had been cleaned and arranged, stones that seemed to have been placed deliberately, and other objects that Nibbles couldn't quite identify in the flickering light. But what shocked Nibbles most profoundly was not the fire or the cave itself. It was not the careful arrangement of the den or the evidence of intentional habitation. It was what, or rather, who, was inside the cave with them. There were other animals here. Several of them, gathered around the fire like they were sitting by a campfire on a peaceful evening, like they were old friends enjoying each other's company. Nibbles' eyes widened in complete disbelief as he took in the impossible sight before him. There was a deer, a beautiful creature with a sleek coat, lying on its side near the fire, its breathing slow and steady and peaceful. There was a rabbit, a small brown creature with alert ears, huddled close to a fox. An actual fox, a creature that should have been actively hunting the rabbit, not resting peacefully beside it, as if they were the oldest of friends. There was a badger, with its distinctive black and white striped face, curled up in a tight ball near the warmth of the flames. There was a porcupine, its quills catching the firelight and glinting like needles of gold, lying carefully so as not to injure its companions. And there was even a young bear cub, perhaps only a few months old, sleeping soundly with its head resting on a pile of soft moss. All of them were gathered together in what appeared to be perfect harmony, perfect peace, perfect cooperation. There were no signs of conflict, no evidence of predator-prey relationships, no tension or fear in the air. Instead, there was a sense of community, of family, of safety. And they were all looking at the wolf as it entered the chamber, their eyes following the massive predator with what appeared to be relief and recognition, not fear or suspicion. The wolf carefully lowered its great head and gently deposited Nibbles on the ground near the fire, setting him down with the same care a mother might use to place her newborn child in a crib. The tiny squirrel stumbled forward slightly, his legs unsteady and weak from being carried for so long, and looked around at the impossible scene before him with wide, disbelieving eyes. It was like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare that had somehow transformed into something beautiful and unexpected. Nothing made sense. Everything was wrong. Everything was impossible. The warmth from the fire washed over Nibbles like a blessing, beginning to dry his wet fur and chase away the bone-deep chill that had settled into his small body. He could feel the heat on his face, could smell the smoke rising from the flames, could sense the safety that seemed to radiate from this place. One of the animals moved toward him, the rabbit, which hopped over with a gentle expression on its face and kind eyes. "Welcome," the rabbit said, its voice soft and warm and filled with genuine kindness. "You're safe now. You're in the sanctuary. I'm Clover, by the way. What's your name?" Nibbles stared at the rabbit in shock, unable to speak, unable to process what was happening. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. I'm Nibbles," he finally managed to say, his voice small and shaky. "Nibbles," Clover repeated, as if tasting the name. "That's a lovely name. You're among friends here, Nibbles. I know everything seems very strange right now, but I promise you, you're safe." He had just been carried through a storm-ravaged forest by a wolf, brought to a cave hidden deep within the earth, and deposited in front of a fire where predators and prey lived together in what appeared to be perfect peace and harmony. Nothing made sense. Everything was wrong. Everything was impossible. Yet it was happening. "I know you're confused," the deer said, lifting its head and looking at Nibbles with kind, gentle eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Everything you're seeing must seem impossible, like a dream. But I assure you, it's all very real. The wolf, his name is Storm. He saved you from the storm. He saves many of us. This is a place where the old rules don't apply, where the natural order has been suspended. This is a place where predator and prey live together in harmony, where the strong protect the weak, where no one is hunted or feared. This is a sanctuary." The deer stood slowly, revealing a long scar along its flank, evidence of a past injury, perhaps from a predator's claws. "My name is Grace," the deer continued. "That scar you see is from before I came here, from a time when I lived in fear. But Storm found me, injured and alone, and brought me to safety. Now I live here with all of them, and I am no longer afraid." Nibbles looked at the wolf, Storm, and saw something in those golden eyes that he hadn't expected to see in the eyes of such a fearsome predator. He saw kindness. He saw compassion. He saw a depth of understanding and intelligence that seemed far beyond what a mere animal should possess. Those eyes held stories, held wisdom, held a gentleness that contradicted everything Nibbles thought he knew about wolves. "Rest now," Storm said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle and warm, like distant thunder that brought rain instead of fear. "You've been through much, more than any small creature should have to endure. Tomorrow, when you've had time to recover, we will tell you everything. We will explain how this place came to be, why we're all here, and what it means to be part of the sanctuary. But for tonight, all you need to know is that you are safe. You are protected. You are home." The other animals seemed to nod in agreement, as if they all understood what Storm was saying. as if they had all been through similar welcomes themselves. Nibbles felt tears beginning to form in his eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion. The cold that had gripped him since the storm began to fade, replaced by warmth. The fear that had been his constant companion began to ease, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. The despair that had threatened to overwhelm him began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope. And as Nibbles huddled close to the warmth of the fire, surrounded by creatures that should have been enemies, but were instead companions and friends, surrounded by safety and care and kindness, he realized something profound and life-changing. The storm had taken everything from him: his home, his family, his entire world, his sense of security and belonging. But in doing so, it had led him to something he could never have imagined possible. He had found a sanctuary. He had found a family. He had found hope. He had found a place where he belonged. As his exhausted body finally gave in to the irresistible pull of sleep, his small frame curled up near the warmth of the fire, with the gentle breathing of the other animals around him. With their presence and their care and their protection, Nibbles' dreams were no longer filled with fear and despair and loss. Instead, they were filled with the possibility of a new beginning, with the promise of tomorrow, with the knowledge that he was no longer alone. Morning light filtered through the cave entrance in soft, golden rays, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air like tiny sprites, performing an ancient, eternal ballet. Nibbles awoke slowly, his consciousness returning to him gradually, like surfacing from deep water after a long dive into darkness. For a long moment, he didn't remember where he was, and panic began to rise in his chest like a tide threatening to overwhelm him. But then the warmth of the fire reached him, spreading across his small body like a comforting blanket, and the familiar scents of the den surrounded him: smoke, earth, the musk of various animals, and something else that smelled like safety and home. The memories of the night before came rushing back in a flood of recollection, each one more vivid than the last. He was in the sanctuary. He was safe. He was alive. Nibbles stretched his small limbs carefully, testing each one, noticing with quiet relief that many of his aches and pains had diminished significantly overnight. His left side, where he had scraped it brutally against the jagged rock during his terrible fall, still throbbed with a persistent ache. But it was a dull, manageable throb rather than the sharp, stabbing pain that had consumed him the night before. His fur was mostly dry now, having been warmed and dried by the fire's gentle heat throughout the long night. He felt stronger, more alive, more like himself than he had since before the storm began its violent assault on the forest. The other animals were already awake and moving about the den with purposeful activity, each engaged in their own tasks and routines. The rabbit, Clover, was carefully organizing a pile of berries and nuts in one corner of the cavern, arranging them by type and size with meticulous attention to detail. The fox, a sleek creature with russet-colored fur that caught the firelight beautifully and intelligent amber eyes that seemed to miss nothing, was carefully arranging some dried herbs near the fire, creating neat bundles that Nibbles assumed had some medicinal or practical purpose. The badger was nowhere to be seen in the main chamber, but Nibbles could hear the sound of digging and scraping coming from somewhere deeper in the cave, suggesting that the badger was perhaps enlarging or maintaining some part of the den's extensive tunnel system. The bear cub was playing contentedly with a smooth stone, rolling it back and forth across the moss-covered floor with obvious delight, occasionally pouncing on it as if it were a living creature, his small growls of concentration and joy echoing softly through the chamber. Grace, the beautiful deer, was standing near the cave entrance, looking out at the forest beyond with a peaceful, contemplative expression. Her posture was relaxed and utterly at ease, suggesting that she was simply enjoying the morning air and the sight of the forest she'd come to love, rather than keeping watch or remaining vigilant against danger. Storm, the great wolf, lay near the fire, his massive body stretched out in a position of complete relaxation, his golden eyes tracking the movements of the other animals with what appeared to be contentment and deep satisfaction. The wolf's expression was one of quiet pride, as if he were observing his creation with the appreciation of an artist surveying a masterpiece. When those intelligent golden eyes turned toward Nibbles, the wolf's mouth curved upward in what looked remarkably like a genuine smile, a gesture that seemed to convey warmth, welcome, and a kind of paternal affection. "Good morning, Nibbles," Storm said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the cavern, filling the space with its resonant warmth. "I trust you slept well? That you're feeling better than you were last night?" Nibbles nodded, still somewhat shy and uncertain in the presence of so many new creatures, still adjusting to the reality of his new situation. Yes, I did," he said quietly, his voice small but growing slightly stronger with each word. "I slept better than I have in days. Thank you for everything, for finding me, for bringing me here, for saving my life." "You're very welcome," Storm replied, his tone gentle and sincere. "That is what we do here. We save lives. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. Come now, join us. We have breakfast prepared. You must be hungry after your ordeal. Your body has much healing to do, and it will need proper nourishment to accomplish that." As if on cue, responding to the wolf's words as if they were a signal, Nibbles' stomach growled loudly and insistently, a sound that echoed through the cavern and caused several of the animals to chuckle good-naturedly. The sound reminded him forcefully that he hadn't eaten since before the storm began, that his small body was desperately depleted of energy and nutrients. He made his way carefully across the moss-covered floor to where Clover was organizing the food, moving slowly and deliberately, still somewhat unsteady on his feet despite the rest he had received. The rabbit smiled warmly at him, her pink nose twitching with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at his approach. "Here," Clover said, pushing a generous pile of acorns and berries toward him with obvious care. "These are fresh. We gathered them yesterday from the oak trees near the stream. They're the best we have. Help yourself to as much as you'd like. There's plenty more where these came from." Nibbles ate hungrily, with the desperate appetite of a creature who had been starving, the food tasting better than anything he had ever consumed before in his entire life. Each acorn was perfectly ripe, its shell cracking easily to reveal the sweet meat inside. Each berry was plump and juicy, bursting with flavor on his tongue, a taste of summer and sunshine and life itself. As he ate, he became aware that the other animals were watching him with expressions of kindness and understanding, as if they remembered exactly what it was like to be new to the sanctuary, to be frightened and confused and desperately grateful all at once. There was no judgment in their eyes, only compassion and acceptance. When Nibbles had eaten his fill and his hunger had finally been satisfied, he felt a sense of physical comfort that had been absent from his life for what felt like an eternity. Storm stood and stretched, his massive body extending to its full, impressive length, his muscles rippling beneath his thick fur in a display of power that was somehow not threatening, but rather reassuring. "Now," the wolf said, "I believe you have many questions. Questions about this place, about how it came to be, about why predators and prey live together in harmony here. we have much to tell you about the sanctuary and its history. Come, gather around. It's time to share our story with our newest member. The animals settled down in a semicircle around the fire, creating a welcoming space for Nibbles to sit comfortably in the center of their circle. Even the badger emerged from the depths of the cave, shaking dust from his distinctive black and white fur, and took a seat among his companions. The bear cub, not wanting to miss anything, climbed into the lap of the fox, who held the small creature gently against her chest, one paw resting protectively across his small body. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling upward toward the cave ceiling, creating a warm, intimate atmosphere that seemed conducive to storytelling. Storm began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of experience and wisdom accumulated over many years of life. "Long ago," he said, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "Long before any of you were born, long before I myself came to this forest, this place was very different from what you see now. The forest beyond these walls was, and still is, a place of constant conflict and fear. The predators hunted relentlessly, driven by hunger and instinct, and the prey fled in terror, driven by the desperate will to survive. The strong survived, and the weak perished. It was the natural order of things, the way of the world, the cycle of life and death that had existed since the beginning of time. But there was one creature, a wolf much like myself, though far greater in spirit and vision, who grew tired of this endless cycle of violence and death, who questioned whether things had to be this way. As Storm spoke, Nibbles found himself drawn completely into the narrative. Captivated by the tale the wolf was weaving, his earlier fears and uncertainties beginning to fade as he listened to this story of transformation and hope. This wolf was named Shadow. Storm continued, his voice taking on a tone of reverence and respect. He was powerful and fearsome, one of the greatest hunters in the forest, with a reputation that made smaller creatures tremble at the mere mention of his name. His speed was legendary, his strength was unmatched, and his hunting skills were unparalleled. But one day, something changed him. Something that would alter the course of his life and create ripples of change that would extend far into the future. He came upon a young deer, much like Grace here, who was trapped and injured, unable to escape from a rocky crevice where she had fallen while fleeing from hunters. Her leg was badly broken, and she was in considerable pain, unable to move, unable to fight, completely vulnerable and defenseless. Grace's eyes grew distant, as if she were remembering something from long ago, though Nibbles knew that couldn't be possible. She was far too young to have known this Shadow that Storm spoke of. But there was something in her expression that suggested she understood the story on a deeper level, that perhaps she saw herself in the injured deer of Storm's tale. And instead of killing her, as his nature and his hunger dictated, as every instinct in his predator's body screamed at him to do, Shadow chose to help her. Storm said, his voice growing softer, more emotional. He brought her food and water, day after day, until her broken leg slowly healed. He protected her from other predators who might have taken advantage of her vulnerability. He spoke to her, comforted her, and gradually, over the course of many weeks, Shadow and the deer became friends. More than that, they became companions, confidants, partners in a friendship that transcended the natural order of the forest. The cave was completely silent now, every animal hanging on Storm's every word, as if this were a story they had heard many times before, but still treasured, still found meaning in. Word of this strange friendship spread throughout the forest like wildfire. Storm continued. Whispers traveled from creature to creature, from warren to burrow to den. Other animals began to seek out Shadow, asking for his protection, offering him their friendship, hoping that perhaps they too could find refuge from the endless cycle of predation and fear. And Shadow, having discovered something far greater than the thrill of the hunt, something more fulfilling than any meal could ever be, compassion, began to gather them. He created this cave, this sanctuary, where predators and prey could live together in peace, where the rules of the forest no longer applied. Storm gestured around the cavern with one massive paw, encompassing the entire space with the gesture. And he established a rule that would become the foundation of everything we do here. Within these walls, no creature would hunt another. No creature would fear another. All would be equal, all would be safe, all would be respected and valued for who they are, not for their place in the food chain. The fox, who had been listening intently to every word, her amber eyes bright with emotion, spoke up. "I am Ember," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle and warm for a creature that Nibbles knew hunted smaller animals in the wild. "I came here 5 years ago, when I was barely more than a kit myself, no older than Theo is now. I had been separated from my mother during a terrible storm, not unlike the one you experienced, Nibbles. And I was starving, desperate, alone in a world that seemed determined to destroy me. I was hunting for anything I could find, driven by hunger to do things that my heart didn't want to do. Storm found me, half dead from starvation and despair. And he brought me here. He taught me that there was more to life than the hunger and the hunt, that I could be more than just my predatory instincts, that I could choose a different path." Ember looked down at the bear cub nestled against her chest, and her expression was filled with such tenderness that Nibbles felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Now," Ember continued, "I help care for creatures like Theo, creatures who would normally be prey for a fox like me. And I find more fulfillment in that than I ever found in hunting." "And I," the badger said, his gruff voice surprisingly emotional, emerging more fully into the firelight, "am Granite. I came here 7 years ago, after being badly injured by a larger badger in a territorial dispute. My wounds were deep and infected, and I thought my life was over, that I would die alone in some dark burrow, forgotten and unmourned. But Storm found me, brought me here, and cared for me until my wounds healed. Now I help maintain and improve this sanctuary. I dig new chambers, I repair the tunnels, I ensure that this place is safe and comfortable for all of us. It gives me purpose, it gives me meaning." The bear cub, still nestled in Ember's lap, made a small sound, a mixture of a growl and a whimper, and the fox translated. "Theo says he doesn't remember his mother or his life before the sanctuary. He was brought here as a tiny cub, barely weaned, and this is all he's ever known, a place where he can be safe and loved, where he doesn't have to fear or hunt or struggle to survive. He's never experienced the fear and desperation of the forest outside." Clover added her own story, her voice soft but clear. "I was a young rabbit when I came here, fleeing desperately from a fox, not Ember, but another, a wild fox who hunted without mercy or conscience. I thought I was going to die, that my life would end in that fox's jaws. But Storm intervened, chasing off the fox, and brought me to safety. I've been here ever since, and I've never once regretted it. I found family here, purpose, and a life worth living." Storm nodded at each of them as they spoke, his expression one of deep affection and pride. Then he turned his attention back to Nibbles, his golden eyes warm and welcoming. "You see," the wolf said, This sanctuary was founded on a principle that contradicts everything the natural order of the forest teaches. It was built on the belief that compassion is stronger than instinct, that cooperation is more powerful than competition, that love can overcome fear and transform even the most hardened hearts. Shadow, the original founder of this place, spent his entire life building it and protecting it, dedicating himself completely to the vision of a world where predator and prey could coexist in peace. When he finally passed away many years ago, his body growing old and weary after a lifetime of service, many of us thought the sanctuary would die with him. But I took up his legacy. I have dedicated my life to continuing his work, to protecting this sanctuary and welcoming those who need refuge, just as Shadow did before me. But how do you survive? Nibbles asked. A practical question forming in his mind, a question that had been nagging at him since he first heard the rules of the sanctuary. If you don't hunt, if you don't eat meat, how do you survive? How do you get the nutrition you need? Storm smiled at the question, as if he had been expecting it, as if he had answered this question many times before. A fair question, the wolf said. A question that shows you're thinking clearly and practically about the reality of our situation. We survive through a combination of methods. First, we gather what we can from the forest: berries, nuts, roots, seeds, and various edible plants. The rabbits are particularly skilled at finding edible vegetation, at knowing which plants are safe to eat and which ones are poisonous. Clover, in particular, has an almost supernatural ability to locate the best food sources. We also fish in the stream that runs near here, which provides us with sustenance and protein. The fishing is actually quite successful. We've learned techniques to catch fish without causing them unnecessary suffering. Storm paused, and his expression grew more serious. And yes, I confess that I sometimes hunt outside the sanctuary, in the forest beyond these walls. It is a necessary compromise, a way to maintain my strength and health while still honoring the principles of this place. But I only hunt what I need to survive, and I never take more than necessary. I never hunt for sport or pleasure. I never kill unnecessarily. It is a compromise, a balance between my nature as a predator and my commitment to the principles of the sanctuary. I have made peace with this contradiction, and I believe it is the right path. Nibbles found himself thinking deeply about this, trying to reconcile the image of Storm as a compassionate protector with the reality that the wolf was still, by necessity, a predator. But something about Storm's explanation made sense, resonated with something deep inside him. The wolf wasn't denying his nature. He was simply controlling it, directing it, making conscious choices rather than acting on pure instinct. He was choosing to be more than what his biology dictated. There's something else you should know, Grace said gently, her voice filled with warmth and wisdom. This sanctuary is not just a place of refuge, not just a shelter from the dangers of the forest. It's a place of healing and transformation. Many of us came here broken, injured by predators, traumatized by loss, or simply lost and desperate, unable to find meaning or purpose in our lives. But through the care and support of Storm and each other, through the community we've built together, we've learned to heal. We've learned that there's more to life than fear and survival. We've learned what it means to truly live, to experience joy and companionship and purpose. Storm nodded solemnly, his expression grave but hopeful. The forest beyond these walls is still a place of conflict and danger, he said. The natural order still prevails out there, unchanged and unchanging. The predators still hunt, and the prey still flee. The strong still dominate the weak. But here, within the sanctuary, we have created something different. We have created a community. We have created a family. We have created a world where the rules are different, where compassion prevails over instinct, where love is stronger than fear. And now, Nibbles, you are part of that family. You are part of this world we've built together. As Nibbles listened to these words, spoken with such sincerity and conviction, he felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and profound. The fear and despair that had gripped him since the storm began to transform into something else entirely. A sense of belonging, a feeling of purpose, a hope for the future that felt real and tangible and possible. Yes, he had lost his home and his family. Yes, the world had been turned upside down by the storm, and everything he had known and loved had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. But in losing everything, he had found something precious and irreplaceable: a new family, a new home, a new beginning filled with possibility and hope. "I have a question," Nibbles said hesitantly, his small voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "What happens now? What will I do here? What is my purpose in the sanctuary?" Storm's eyes gleamed with what appeared to be pride and affection. "That," the wolf said, "is entirely up to you. That is one of the beautiful things about this place. We each find our own path, our own purpose, our own way of contributing to the community. Some of us gather food and maintain our stores. Some of us maintain the den, digging new chambers and repairing tunnels. Some of us provide care and comfort to the injured or the traumatized. Some of us simply provide companionship and support to the others, listening to their stories and sharing in their joys and sorrows. You are young and strong, despite your recent trials and tribulations. You have time to discover what your purpose will be, what your gifts are, what you can offer to this community. For now, rest and heal, learn about us, and let us learn about you. Spend time with your new family, and when you're ready, when you feel strong enough, you can begin to contribute to the sanctuary in whatever way feels right to you, whatever feels true to your heart." Clover reached over and touched Nibbles gently with one of her soft paws, a gesture of affection and welcome. "Welcome home, Nibbles," she said warmly, her voice filled with genuine kindness and acceptance. "Welcome to the sanctuary. Welcome to your new family." And as the morning light continued to filter through the cave entrance, bathing everything in golden warmth, as the fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling upward, as the sound of the forest beyond drifted through the chamber, Nibbles felt something he hadn't expected to feel again after the storm had taken everything from him. Happiness. Not the carefree, innocent happiness of his childhood in the oak tree, which had been shattered by the storm's violence, but something deeper and more meaningful, more profound and more real. A happiness born from being understood, from being accepted unconditionally, from being loved not for what he could do or what he could provide, but simply for who he was. A happiness that came from finding home not as a place, but as a feeling, as a connection to others, as a sense of belonging that seemed to fill every corner of his small heart. He was home. Finally, truly, completely, he was home. And more than that, he was loved. And in that moment, surrounded by his new family, warmed by the fire, safe within the sanctuary's walls, Nibbles understood that he would spend the rest of his life grateful for the storm that had taken everything from him, because it had led him here, to this place, to these creatures, to this new life that was just beginning. The days following Nibbles' arrival unfolded like pages in a beautiful book. Time moved differently within the cave's protective walls. Slower, more meaningful. The outside world felt like a distant memory. On his second day, Clover offered to show him around. "I remember being terrified and confused when I first arrived," she said warmly. "A proper tour helped me understand how large the sanctuary truly is." Nibbles followed eagerly as Clover led him through passages he hadn't noticed before. The cavern was far more extensive than he realized. A vast network of chambers and tunnels expanded over many years. "This is our gathering chamber," Clover explained, gesturing to the main space where the fire burned. "This is where we share meals and stories, where we strengthen our bonds as a community." They moved deeper into the cave system. Clover showed him a large storage chamber carved into the stone walls, lined with preserved nuts, dried berries, seeds, and provisions. "We gather food during warm months and store it here for winter," she said. Granite emerged from a tunnel, his striped face appearing in the dim light. "Young Nibbles, Clover is giving you the grand tour, I see. Good. You should know how we all work together here." The badger gestured proudly around the storage chamber. "I've spent years organizing this space. When I first came here, we barely had enough supplies to survive one winter. Now we have reserves for even the harshest seasons. No one in this sanctuary will ever go hungry." Clover led Nibbles to the sleeping chamber, a smaller, intimate space covered with soft moss and dried grass arranged into comfortable nests. "This is where we each rest," she said quietly. "You can choose any empty nest or create your own." "I'll create my own," Nibbles said thoughtfully. "Something that feels like me." "That's what makes this place special," Clover said approvingly. "We each contribute our own personality." They continued exploring. Clover showed him a chamber opening onto a small stream. "This is where we get fresh water and where Storm and Ember sometimes fish, carefully, with respect for the creatures." As they returned toward the main chamber, Clover paused at a beautiful section where sunlight streamed through an opening in the ceiling. Plants grew here, ferns, mosses, and flowering plants that somehow thrived in the cave's environment. "This is my favorite place," Clover said softly. "I come here when I need to think. These plants remind me that life finds a way, even in darkness. Even here, beauty and growth are possible." Over the following days, Nibbles developed routines and relationships with the other inhabitants. He spent time with Ember, learning about the fox's past and her journey to the sanctuary. "I was always alone," Ember said one afternoon. "Even with other foxes, I was alone. We competed, fought over territory. There was no real connection. But here," she gestured around, "I have found family." Nibbles also spent time with Grace, who taught him about edible plants and shared stories of her terrified life before the sanctuary. "I was always running," Grace said, her eyes distant. "Always ready to flee. I never knew peace. But Storm gave me that gift. He showed me it was possible to live without fear." Theo, the young bear cub, became Nibbles' closest companion. The two young creatures played together, wrestling gently, chasing each other through the chambers. "I don't remember anything before the sanctuary," Theo said one day. "This is all I've ever known. Sometimes I dream of other places, but it fades like a dream when I wake." On the 5th day, Nibbles felt strong enough to venture outside with Storm, Clover, and Ember. The forest, which had seemed terrifying during the storm, now revealed itself to be beautiful and full of life. "The forest isn't evil," Storm explained as they walked. "It's neutral, containing both danger and beauty, both death and life. The key is to move through it with awareness and respect, not fear. They gathered acorns, nuts, berries, and seeds. Clover taught Nibbles which plants were safe to eat. The work was peaceful and satisfying. On their way back, they encountered a young fox being chased by a larger predator. Storm immediately sprang into action, intercepting the pursuer with a warning snarl. The larger creature, recognizing Storm's power, quickly retreated. Storm approached the trembling young fox slowly and carefully. "You are safe now," he said gently. "Come with us. We have a place where creatures like you can find refuge." The young fox hesitated, then followed them back to the sanctuary. That evening, as the new arrival was being welcomed, Nibbles realized something profound. The sanctuary wasn't just a place of safety for those already there. It was a beacon of hope for the entire forest. By living here, each of them was contributing to something far greater than themselves. They were part of a quiet revolution against the natural order of fear and predation. As he settled into his newly created nest that night, lined with soft moss and decorated with smooth pebbles, Nibbles reflected on how much had changed in just 5 days. He had gone from being a terrified survivor to being a valued member of a loving community. He had made friends, learned new skills, and discovered purpose and belonging. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries and experiences. The future, which had seemed so bleak days ago, now shimmered with possibility and promise. He was home. He was loved. He was part of something meaningful and beautiful. As sleep claimed him, Nibbles dreamed not of storms and loss, but of forests filled with light, of communities bound by compassion, of a world where predator and prey lived together in peace. 3 weeks had passed since Nibbles arrived at the sanctuary, and he had settled into a comfortable routine. The initial shock of loss had transformed into a quiet acceptance, and the cave had become truly home. He spent his days gathering food with Clover, playing with Theo, and learning from Storm about the ways of the forest and the principles that governed the sanctuary. But on a gray morning, when clouds hung heavy over the forest and the air felt thick with tension, everything changed. A group of animals arrived at the cave entrance, not seeking refuge, but demanding it. They were a pack of wolves, led by a scarred and powerful creature named Fang. Unlike Storm, whose presence conveyed wisdom and calm authority, Fang radiated aggression and hunger. "We know what you do here," Fang growled, his voice echoing through the cavern. "You gather prey animals and hide them from those of us who need to eat. This ends now. Give us the deer, the rabbits, and any other creatures we can consume, or we will take them by force." Storm stepped forward, his massive form blocking the entrance. His voice was steady but firm. "The sanctuary is a place of peace. No creature here will be harmed. You are welcome to stay if you accept our rules, but you cannot come here with threats and demands." Fang's lip curled in a snarl. "Your rules mean nothing to me, old wolf. The forest operates on one principle: the strong eat the weak. Your sanctuary is an abomination against nature itself." The tension in the cave was palpable. Nibbles felt fear rising in his chest as he watched the confrontation unfold. This was the real world intruding on their peaceful sanctuary, the harsh reality of the forest asserting itself against their carefully constructed community. "You're right," Storm said unexpectedly, his words causing everyone to pause. "The forest does operate on that principle. And yes, by the rules of nature, you are stronger than many creatures here. But strength comes in many forms, Fang. There is the strength of teeth and claws, which you possess. But there is also the strength of community, the strength of purpose, the strength of choosing compassion over instinct. Meaningless philosophy, Fang spat. I came here to hunt, not to listen to lectures. Then you came to the wrong place, Storm replied calmly. But I will make you an offer. Stay for 3 days. Experience what we have built here. See if perhaps there is another way to live. If after 3 days you still wish to leave, you may go with our blessing. But while you are here, you will honor our rules. Fang considered this for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Finally, he nodded curtly. 3 days. But if I'm not convinced, I'm taking what I want. Over the next 3 days, something remarkable happened. Fang and his wolves were integrated into the community. They were given food, plenty of it, gathered and prepared with care. They were shown the caves, the organization, the way the sanctuary functioned. More importantly, they were treated with respect and kindness, not fear or judgment. Nibbles watched as Fang gradually began to soften. The scarred wolf spent time with Storm, listening to stories of Shadow and the founding of the sanctuary. He watched as Ember, a fox, showed genuine affection to a young rabbit. He observed how creatures that should have been natural enemies played together without fear or violence. On the 3rd day, Fang approached Storm. The scarred wolf's expression was troubled, conflicted. I don't understand, Fang said, his voice rough with emotion. How is this possible? How can you live like this, denying your nature, your hunger, your instincts? We don't deny them, Storm replied. We acknowledge them and choose to transcend them. Yes, I still hunt occasionally outside these walls. Yes, I still have the instinct to kill. But I have learned that I am more than my instincts. I can choose a different path. Fang was silent for a long time. Then slowly, he nodded. I will stay, he said quietly, if you will have me. The other wolves, seeing their leader's decision, chose to stay as well. And the sanctuary grew larger, stronger, more diverse. But the challenge wasn't over. Word of Fang's decision spread through the forest, and not all creatures were pleased. A group of hunters, humans who lived on the edge of the forest, heard rumors of animals gathering in a cave. They came to investigate, driven by curiosity and the desire to capture creatures for sale. Storm faced this new threat with the same calm determination. He organized the community, creating escape routes and hiding places. He taught the animals how to move silently and how to recognize danger. And when the hunters finally arrived, Storm met them at the cave entrance. The confrontation was brief. The hunters, seeing only a massive wolf guarding the cave, decided it wasn't worth the risk. They left, and the sanctuary was safe once more. But the experience shook everyone. It revealed how fragile their peace truly was, how dependent they were on Storm's strength and wisdom. It also revealed something else. How much they had come to care for each other. How willing they all were to stand together against threats. That night, as the community gathered around the fire, there was a palpable sense of unity and purpose. They had faced challenges together and emerged stronger. The sanctuary wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a true home, a place worth fighting for. Nibbles sat between Clover and Theo, feeling the warmth of their presence beside him. He thought about how much he had changed in just 3 weeks. The frightened, desperate mouse who had stumbled into the cave was gone. In his place was a creature who belonged to something greater than himself, who was part of a community bound together by love and shared purpose. Storm looked around the fire at his gathered family, and Nibbles saw something in the old wolf's eyes, satisfaction, yes, but also a quiet sadness. The challenges they had faced were only the beginning. The outside world would always pose threats. But as long as they stood together, as long as they held on to the principles of the sanctuary, they would endure. "Tomorrow," Storm said, his voice carrying through the cavern, "we continue our work. We gather food. We care for each other. We welcome those who seek refuge. The world beyond these walls may be harsh and unforgiving. But here, within these walls, we have created something beautiful. Something worth protecting. Something worth believing in." And as the fire crackled and the animals settled in for the night, Nibbles felt a deep sense of peace. He was home. He was part of a family. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead.